I remember the moment I realized I was stepping into a marriage with a man I loathe. It wasn't during the vows, though I did speak those words, letting them slip from my lips like shards of glass onto a pristine floor. No, the moment struck me 3 weeks prior, in Margaret Ashford's drawing room, drenched in the scent of white orchids and the weight of old money, as she grinned at me like a cat eyeing its caught prey. She called it a merger. A joining of two illustrious families, as if I were merely a line item in some sordid estate deal her son needed to finalize before hitting 30. My brother Noah, ever the optimist, squeezed my hand beneath the table, whispering that it would all be fine. But Noah was blind to the truth. The way Caden Ashford lounged across the room, arms crossed, surveying me with those dark, inscrutable eyes. Not like a suitor, but like a man confirming his order had arrived on time. I had never exchanged words with Caden before that fateful meeting. I had seen him, of course, everyone had. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a jawline chiseled from ice. He stormed through rooms like a tempest, demanding no permission and offering no apologies for the wreckage left in his wake. At 29, he had never taken a mate, never allowed an Omega to breathe the same air for more than a fleeting moment. Whispers floated around. He was broken, his alpha instincts stunted, a creature of cold indifference. In that drawing room, I almost bought into the myth. He hadn't looked at me with warmth. He scrutinized me as one might a map, calculating routes with that relentless gaze. When his mother formally introduced us, he extended his hand, uttering, "Eli, I've heard about you." Just 5 words, tossed into the air like stones disturbing the stillness. I grasped his hand. His grip was firm and leisurely, igniting that wretched, involuntary Omega response to a powerful alpha's touch, and I despised myself for it. I hated my own biology. I snatched my hand back faster than decorum allowed, silent, because if I spoke, the words that would spill forth wouldn't be fit for Margaret Ashford's floral drawing room. The wedding was set for 3 weeks. Just 3 weeks. As if they feared that given more time, I might bolt. They weren't wrong. I spent those weeks simmering in a quiet rage, navigating fittings, paperwork, and family dinners where everyone pretended this was some grand romance. My mother shed tears of joy. My father waxed poetic about legacy. Noah kept squeezing my hand. Only Ren, my best friend, dared to sit with me the night before the wedding, on the floor of my childhood room, voicing what everyone else tiptoed around. "You don't have to do this, Eli. You know that, right?" I looked at her, considering Noah, the debt binding our family to the Ashfords, the devastation that would ensue if I walked away. I thought of Caden's eyes, that unwavering, unnerving gaze, and replied, "I know." And yet, I proceeded. The church was a sea of faces I barely recognized. Ivory flowers adorned every pew, and the music was unfamiliar. As I strode down the aisle in a suit that cost more than my entire existence, I kept my gaze fixed ahead, my face a mask, my hands steady. And there stood Caden at the altar, watching me approach with that same inscrutable expression, that map-reading stare, and something twisted violently in my chest, threatening to halt my progress. When I finally faced him, the officiant began his speech, the room sinking into ceremonial silence. For the first time, I stood before Caden Ashford without barriers. Close, he was worse. He smelled of cedarwood and something darker, something that made my Omega instincts perk up, alert and aware. His eyes, I realized, were not black but a deep, rich brown, fixed on me with an intensity that shrank the entire church to insignificance. I don't know what overtook me. Perhaps it was the flowers I hadn't chosen, the music I didn't recognize, or the 3 weeks of compliance weighing on my soul. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, as if I were already his, as if this was already fate sealed. So, before the officiant could finish his opening words, I leaned slightly toward Caden, whispering low enough for only him to hear, "I hate you." The room remained oblivious. The flowers didn't tremble. The music continued its gentle serenade. Only Caden heard me, and what he did next, instead of recoiling, instead of flinching, changed everything. He held my gaze, and the corner of his mouth twitched, just slightly, into what could almost be construed as a smile. He responded, low and deliberate, as if delivering a verdict, "I know." He spoke like he had been anticipating my confession, like it was the dawn of something, not its demise. And there, at that altar, filled with hatred yet unfazed by it, Caden Ashford smiled, and I understood, with a chilling clarity, that I was in a world of trouble. The Ashford estate was an exquisite trap, draped in beauty that made my heart clench with resentment. It sprawled on the edge of a shimmering lake, surrounded by ancient trees that whispered secrets in the wind. In the evenings, the water caught the light, casting reflections that seemed plucked from a fever dream. My room, our room, though Caden hadn't dared to cross the invisible line I'd drawn, faced east, and every morning the sun poured in like liquid gold, mercilessly illuminating the pristine, towering windows. 4 days had passed. 4 days of navigating the contours of a life I had never chosen. 4 days of staff who glided around me, addressing me as Mr. Whitmore Ashford with voices drenched in neutrality. For dinners where Caden sat across from me, saying little but watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle, compelling me to stare down at my plate as if it held the answers to the universe. He was always there, lurking in the corners of my new reality. I had expected a man like Caden Ashford to be an elusive phantom, forever ensnared in boardrooms, a husband whose presence was a mere formality, existing only in paperwork and photographs. But he was here, haunting me in the most deliberate of ways. Each morning, I'd find him already seated at the table. In the library, he would materialize 20 minutes later, book in hand but never turning a page. And one evening, seeking solace in the garden, I felt the glass door slide open precisely 7 minutes after I had escaped. I didn't turn. "Are you stalking me?" I shot back, half joking. "I live here," he replied, his tone casual, as if that explained everything. "Not an answer," I retorted, feeling the tension crackle in the air. He stood beside me, a breath away, his gaze fixed on the lake. "I like the garden in the evenings," he stated, as if that settled the matter. Unable to resist, I turned to look at him. Up close, in the dimming light, Caden was devastatingly handsome, a walking contradiction that stirred something dangerous within me. He wasn't looking at me yet, but I could feel the weight of his awareness, like he was patiently allowing me to drink him in. "Ren thinks you're a danger," I said, testing the waters. He turned, his eyes locking onto mine without a hint of hesitation. "What do you think?" I recalled his words at the altar, the way he had looked at me in his mother's drawing room, like I was a map he was eager to navigate. 4 days of being scrutinized with an intensity that felt deliberate, like he was waiting for me to catch up to his unspoken agenda. "I think," I said, carefully choosing my words, "you should know I'm not going to fall for you. I won't morph into whatever fantasy you have in mind for this arrangement. I'll be civil. I'll be present. But I am not yours, Caden. Not the way your mother wants. Not how this house expects." Silence hung between us, heavy and pregnant with unspoken truths. Then he said, "I don't need you to fall in love with me." "Good," I shot back, my heart racing. "I just need you to stay." His words hung in the air, a confession rather than a command. And the flicker of vulnerability that crossed his face, just a glimpse before he masked it, was not the expression of a calculating man. It was the look of someone terrified of something lurking in the shadows, doing everything to keep it hidden. I was at a loss. So I turned my gaze back to the lake, saying nothing, as Caden lingered beside me until the last light faded, neither of us daring to break the silence first. That night I called Ren. I spilled my thoughts about the garden and Caden's insistence on my presence. She was quiet for a moment before saying, "Eli, that man isn't emotionally unavailable. He's the exact opposite. He's so emotionally available it's aggressive. He just doesn't know how to express it in a way that doesn't set off alarms." "That's a terrifying thing to say." "Honey," she replied, "you married him. You need to start being terrified of the right things." 2 days later, I stumbled upon the room. I had been exploring. The estate was a labyrinth, and I had decided to map it, reclaiming a semblance of control. On the 3rd floor, east wing, I opened a door I'd assumed was a closet and froze. Inside, it was a shrine to me. Not in a sinister way that would send anyone running, but still unsettling. Photographs from events I had attended, my graduation, even a gallery showing of my artwork from 2 years ago that I hadn't mentioned to anyone of consequence. There was a copy of a literary magazine that had published a short essay I wrote under a pseudonym. And a note, scrawled in Caden's elegant script, simply stating Eli Whitmore. October. Confirm attendance. Dated 14 months ago. He had known about me for 14 months. He had been watching from the shadows, planning this from a distance long before our mothers ever orchestrated this union. I stood in that room, clutching the note, realizing I hadn't walked into an arranged marriage of convenience. It was something far more intricate. I had been chosen, deliberately, quietly, over a long stretch of time, by a man who had yet to find the words to tell me. The air was thick with tension that evening, charged like a storm waiting to break. I stormed into his study, my heart pounding, the note clutched tightly in my hand like a weapon. I dropped it on his desk, the sound echoing in the silence, and stood there, daring him to meet my gaze. When he finally did, something flickered in his expression. A tiny shift, like a door creaking open just a smidge before he remembered to be careful. How long? I demanded, my voice cutting through the stillness. He leaned back, that infuriating calmness radiating from him. Caden Ashford, I was discovering, had an unsettling knack for staring down what most people would rather avoid. 14 months, he replied, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Like it was just another mundane detail to drop. You were watching me for 14 months before your mother called mine? My voice dripped with disbelief. Watching is a strong word, he countered, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. There are photographs, Caden. He paused, a glimmer of defiance sparking in his eyes. I attended events where you were present. I didn't hide it. I didn't know you were there. My frustration bubbled over. You weren't meant to. Not yet. I stared him down, irritation bubbling just beneath the surface. That is not the reassuring clarification you think it is. In one fluid motion, he rose from his chair, and the room seemed to shift, an alpha asserting dominance, the very air thickening around us. But instead of advancing, he turned toward the window, his back to me, lost in a moment of contemplation that felt different, not guarded, but almost reverent. I saw you at the Callaway Foundation Gala, he said, his voice low and steady. 14 months ago. You were arguing with a server about the canapes. Not rudely, mind you, you were passionately making a case about the ethical sourcing of an ingredient. Everyone else pretended not to hear, but I was captivated. My mouth opened, then snapped shut, caught off guard. You wrote your number on a napkin and handed it to the server in case the chef wanted to discuss alternatives. The server looked bewildered, but you were unfazed. He finally turned to face me, the intensity in his gaze almost palpable. I went back and dug deeper to find out who you were. I told myself it was mere curiosity. But I am, he paused, not a man who does things simply. The silence was deafening. Outside, the lake lay still as if it held its breath. I clenched the note in my hand, forcing myself to let it go, to breathe through the chaos. You arranged this marriage because of a gala conversation about canapes? I couldn't help but scoff. I arranged this marriage, he replied, his voice dropping to a sultry whisper, because in 14 months of observing you exist, I never found a single moment where you weren't unapologetically, stubbornly yourself. And I find that, he hesitated, something flickering across his features. I find that I cannot look away from it. There it was, the truth lurking beneath his icy exterior. Caden Ashford, the enigma who was supposed to be emotionally detached, was anything but. He felt everything, and that intensity simmered beneath the surface, a potent force he struggled to contain. 14 months of silent admiration had morphed into something dangerously alluring, something he couldn't control. I should have been furious. And I kept that anger at the forefront, easily accessible. But beneath it lay a current of something warm, thrilling, and utterly unwelcome. I shoved it down hard. This isn't normal, Caden. I know. Normal people introduce themselves. They ask for a date. They don't build dossiers. I know that too. You can't just, I faltered. You can't just want someone this much without telling them. His gaze held mine for what felt like an eternity. I'm telling you now. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in the east-facing room with towering windows, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I thought of the man at the gala who couldn't tear himself away from my passionate tirade about canapés. I mulled over 14 months of patient observation, the note, confirm attendance, and the fact that he had stood in my gallery, surrounded by my art, silent yet observant, revealing nothing while absorbing everything. I recalled Ren's words, "You need to start being terrified of the right things." Because the truth hit me like a lightning bolt, I wasn't terrified of Caden anymore. I was terrified of myself, of the way I had started to listen for his footsteps in the morning, how the garden felt alive when he stood beside me, and how, somewhere in the past week, I had stopped wanting him to remain on his side of that invisible line. Then, at 2 a.m., there came a knock at my door. Not forceful, just 3 soft taps. Caden's voice drifted through, low and inviting. "Eli, I can hear you not sleeping. Come downstairs. I made tea." It was the most mundane, human, utterly ordinary thing he had ever said to me. And somehow, that, more than everything else, shattered something deep within me, cracking my carefully constructed facade wide open. We sat in the kitchen at 2 a.m. with tea neither of us was really drinking, and for the first time since the altar, there was no performance between us. No composure, no strategy. Just 2 people sitting across a kitchen island in a very large, very quiet house, both of them pretending the air wasn't charged with something that had been building for, apparently, 14 months on one side and about 10 days on mine. Caden had his sleeves rolled up. I had never seen his forearms before and I found this an absurd thing to notice, but I noticed it. He was looking at his cup. I was looking at him looking at his cup. The kitchen smelled like bergamot and cedar and the particular silence of 2 a.m., which is different from all other silences, more honest, somehow, and less forgiving of pretense. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Yes." "At the altar. When I said I hated you." I paused. "You smiled. Why did you smile?" He was quiet for a moment. When he looked up, his eyes were direct as always, but something in them was unguarded in a way I hadn't seen before. "Because you finally looked at me," he said. "Really looked. For the first time. And even if what you saw made you angry, you saw me. I have been invisible to you for 14 months and then you stood at that altar and you saw me and I—" He stopped. Set down his cup. It seemed worth smiling about. Something in my throat went tight. "That is," I said slowly, "the saddest and strangest thing anyone has ever said to me." "I know. You keep saying that. It keeps being true." I looked at him. The real him. Not the alpha heir, not the cold strategist, not the man from the drawing room who had looked at me like a map. The man who had stood in my gallery alone and looked at my art. The man who had written confirm attendance on a piece of paper like a prayer. The man who had knocked on my door at 2 a.m. because he could hear me not sleeping, because he was also not sleeping, because neither of us had figured out how to put down the weight of what we were becoming to each other. "Caden," I said, "I need you to understand something." He went very still. That particular stillness I now recognized as him bracing, armor sliding into place. "All right. I am not forgiving you for the dossier." The pause. "That seems fair. Or for the 14 months of surveillance that you are calling attending events. Also fair. Or for the way you sat in that drawing room and looked at me like I was a route on a map." Something flickered in his eyes. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant," I said. "That's the thing, Caden. I'm starting to understand what you mean. And that is extremely inconvenient for me." He looked at me. "Waiting. I don't want to fall in love with someone who feels things the way you do," I told him honestly. "Because when you love something you don't let go of it. I've seen it in everything you do. The way you move through rooms. The way you arranged 14 months of quiet attention around one moment at a gala. The way you knocked on my door at 2 a.m. because you could hear me. Caden, you love things the way other people love entire countries. Completely and without an exit strategy. And that terrifies me. The kitchen was very quiet. Then, do you want me to stop? It was the first time I had heard anything in his voice that might be called vulnerable. Not much. Caden wasn't built for much, but enough. Enough that I felt it land in my chest and stay there. I looked at my tea. I looked at his forearms. I looked at the man across from me who had decided at a gala over canopy ethics that I was someone worth 14 months of patient, quiet devotion. Who had said I know when I told him I hated him, not because he was dismissing it, but because he had made room for it. Because he wanted all of me, including the parts that pushed back. No, I said. I don't want you to stop. The silence that followed was different from all the other silences. It was not the silence of two strangers in an arrangement. It was the silence of something beginning, fragile and enormous and terrifying in the best possible way. Caden reached across the island and turned my hand over on the counter, slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull back. He set his palm against mine. Not gripping. Not demanding. Just present. Warm and certain and entirely unhurried. I'm not going to rush you, he said quietly. I'm not going anywhere. I've waited 14 months, Eli. I can wait longer. I looked at our hands. I thought about the altar, about ivory flowers and music I didn't choose, about the moment I leaned in and said I hate you and he said I know, like it was the most natural response in the world. Like he had known even then that there was something underneath the hate, something younger and more honest and more afraid, that would eventually, in a kitchen at 2 a.m. with cooling tea, find its way to the surface. I turned my hand over and laced my fingers through his. He exhaled, very quietly, barely audible, the exhale of a man who has been holding something in for a very long time. And then, finally, fully, Caden Ashford smiled. Not the barely there altar smile. A real one. Unhidden. And it was devastating. It was the face underneath everything. Warm and private and entirely directed at me. I still don't forgive you for the dossier, I told him. I know, he said. And he was still smiling. We stayed in that kitchen until the light came in gold through the east-facing windows, and somewhere between the cooling tea and the dawn, I stopped thinking about what I had walked into and started thinking about what I might, slowly, carefully, and entirely against my original intentions, be walking toward. The Omega had said I hate you at the altar. The Alpha had said I know. And in a kitchen at sunrise, with my hand in his, I finally understood that both of us had been telling the truth, and that the truth, like most things worth keeping, was more complicated and more wonderful than either of us had planned.